antiquated and ridiculous.
Others can actually make life very annoying and death expensive. In part one of her series, Janet Wu says these flawed laws are also extremely difficult to change.
I'm about to break the law. In Massachusetts, playing part of the national anthem, that is, not in its entirety, is against the law. Fine, $100. I'm getting out my checkbook.
It's an outgrowth of a World War I sentiment, as nearly as I can tell.
When patriotism is very high.
Yes, yes.
And if someone, could they be prosecuted for not doing this?
I don't see why not. It's on the books.
Grab someone's chicken and they can hold you for 24 hours without calling the police. And if you're found guilty, it will land you in jail for 3 years or a $500 fine. Body piercing may be legal in Massachusetts, but tattoos are not. Go across state lines to get these designs or risk a year in jail and a $300 fine. Cause a disturbance in a library more than once a year, 1 month mandatory prison sentence. And this summer, if your kids win a goldfish at the carnival, call the cops. That's what the MSPCA did, and after a year and a half of litigation, a carnival booth operator got a fat little fine because you can't give away livestock in Massachusetts as a prize. Now this is the state wildflower, the Mayflower, and picking it in Massachusetts is a $50 fine, but perhaps even more bizarre. Pick it at night or pick it wearing a disguise, and it's a $100 penalty.
It's not the $50 fine or the $100 fine. It's the contempt that you have for the law that describes these kinds of dichotomy between doing it in the daytime or doing it, picking a Mayflower in disguise or at night. You know, you wonder what else is in the laws that you need to be afraid of.
And there is plenty to be afraid of. Just ask restaurant and grocery owners in Maynard. A little-known state law dating back to the last century requires a specific special permit to sell candy, soda, ice cream, and fruit on Sundays. Most communities ignore it. Not here. What do you think about this $10 permit that you have to sell on Sundays, just these items?
Well, would you like me to confine myself to what I think of this law or all of the licenses that are required to be a purveyor of food?
Other businessmen find it even less amusing. The former owner of this store gave away ice cream on Sundays in protest. He's since closed his doors and reportedly moved to Tahiti. The proprietor of this longtime establishment refuses to buy the license and refused to be interviewed. His reason, quote, this is a petty little town and they can be very vindictive.
This is merely a license that's on the books that the town has chosen to enforce for as many years as anyone can remember.
Bottom line, it's easy money.
That does point out the unfairness of leaving laws like that on the books, because it does allow local officials to selectively decide when to enforce these types of laws.
Perlin says many of the obscure laws if taken to court would be ruled unconstitutional, but it's hard to change antiquated rules. As the funeral home industry, with the increase in cremations, Massachusetts is one of the last states to prohibit casket rentals. Embalming procedures now allow you to put a loved one in a more attractive but expensive casket for the wake without having to buy it outright.
Everything that touches the body will go with this cardboard unit. The body will be cremated in. It will slide out.
But in Massachusetts, you have to burn the entire casket. Pressure on the legislature from industry leaders to maintain the status quo and the more lucrative sales makes it difficult to change this, unless consumers like Lynn Johnson, who's shopping early, becomes the majority.
I don't think the consumer should have to buy a casket that they're not going to use again. I more or less think it's a ripoff.
No one is suggesting all caskets be rented, merely that those who want a wake and cremation have the option of renting a casket. But this law, like many of the other ones we talked about, won't be changed or taken off the books anytime soon. Legal experts say if you think it takes the legislature forever to pass a law, it takes even longer to get rid of it. Natalie?
Obviously, some of these have been here for a long time. How about tomorrow, Janet?
We're going to take a look at one law, an in-depth look at one law that was never intended to hurt anyone, but it turns out that it's been devastating for one company in Chelsea.
Okay, Janet, thank you very much.
See your New England Jeep and Eagle dealer now.
Tonight, we continue our series on flawed laws with a look at how some well-intentioned laws can trap innocent victims. The Superfund law, which was passed by Congress a decade and a half ago, forces polluters to clean up contaminated sites.
But now News Center 5's Janet Wu reports a Chelsea man may lose his business, even though the government isn't enforcing the law in his case.
It is the last bastion in America for an art form that blends unique craftsmanship, requiring patience, and precision, requiring discipline. Chelsea Clock is now the only company making clocks in the United States. But the doors here could soon close if Rick Levitt doesn't find his way out of a bureaucratic maze that has left him spinning.
It's been quite bad. I lose a lot of sleep over it. I'm worried about the employees here. They make a terrific contribution. They're all highly skilled. There are many nights when I wake up wondering if we're still going to have the business.
The nightmare began 5 years ago when Levitt decided to expand his business. With a steady and impressive list of customers like the White House for nearly a century, Chelsea Clock was on firm financial footing. But first, the bank had to conduct some routine tests.
In routine testing of the soil and groundwater, discovered that there was contamination. An old industrial cleaning solvent was in the groundwater here.
Levitt started digging and discovered that about 80 gallons of the solvent had been poured down a drain on the property over a period of decades that began in the 1940s, before he bought the business, before there were any environmental regulations about disposing chemicals, and well before the bank first gave Levitt the money to buy the business 17 years ago.
It was quite awful. The bank demanded their money back. We have a mortgage on this building, this property, the same way you perhaps have a mortgage on your house. And they wanted to get their money back, because what happens is the property becomes worthless, and it's collateral for the bank loan.
Since then, he has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees in hopes of saving his company. Employees saw pay cuts, loss in benefits. He says he can't afford the estimated $1 million needed to clean up the property. For a while, the bank was content to accept accelerated loan payments, but earlier this year, it was once again calling back the loan.
The only way it can happen would be to liquidate the assets of the business and all of the... so the business would effectively close and the jobs would be lost here.
Perhaps the biggest irony is that while Levitt has contacted state environmental officials about his dilemma, they have never responded. In fact, when we called the Department of Environmental Affairs, they had no records on the Chelsea Clock Company. But after several days of investigation, the Department of Environmental Affairs said it finally located the 2 letters from Levitt. It refused on-camera interviews, saying it was deep into negotiations with some of Chelsea Clock's neighbors, which may be partially responsible for the pollution. While the agency confirmed Chelsea Clock's only financial problem centers on the pollution, the department admits the solvents are of no danger to anyone since there are no wells or drinking water sources anywhere near the property. Meanwhile, the Superfund law is under attack throughout the country. Even President Clinton calls it a disaster.
Some things work and some things don't. We ought to be subsidizing the things that work and discouraging the things that don't. I'd like to use that Superfund to clean up pollution for a change and not just pay lawyers.
But that was 2 years ago. Who dropped the ball?
Once a law is passed, it's behind the legislature. And it takes a great deal to move them to reconsider. And the legislature is not equipped to deal with specific exemptions to general policies. They just can't handle that.
Levitt says he's not looking for a special exemption. There are hundreds of small businessmen in the same predicament. Instead, he wants the federal government to cap the number of sites that need to be cleaned, so only those posing real threats to the public are vulnerable. He also believes there should be a cutoff as to how far back owners have financial liability. This would end some of the high legal fees, which now total more than the cleanups themselves.
So under the law, even though all that pollution occurred before he or his people bought that business, he's responsible.
Retroactivity means that they have full responsibility because he owns the land.
All right, Janet.